Now let's begin by finding out more about the man behind the success story. Who is Femi Otedola?
Thank you very much. Femi Otedola is a guy that has come to this world without knowing how he came into the world, and a guy that believes that don't compete with destiny.
Wow, okay. It's a very interesting introduction.
Absolutely.
Well, you began your career maintaining your family's printing business. What was that experience like for you?
Quite interesting. When I was young, 6 years old, that was when I set up my first company. I had the entrepreneurial spirit in me, and I remember very well, vividly, that my father then used to work for Mobile, and when he had his friends coming into the house, and I will do the manicure and pedicure, and they'll pay me. I write a receipt for them.
Right.
When I was 6 years old. And when I was 9 years old, I told my father to buy me a briefcase, which he did. And I took to school, and all my schoolmates used to laugh at me. I had this briefcase, and they used to laugh at me.
Why would they laugh at you? What did
Everybody
you do
had
with
a
the
bag,
briefcase?
and I had a briefcase. One of my father's old briefcases.
So, talk to us about your early years in the oil business and Zenon. Why did you decide to go into the oil industry when your family have such a heavy political background?
No, I think going into the oil business, it's kind of spiritual.
Right.
Nothing to do with me. I just follow my chart in life, what God has destined my life to be. And my wife and I, we used to lounge. Then I'd made some money, savings, and I used to keep the Nigerian banks were paying 35% in interest. And I said to myself, it doesn't make sense to take any risk to set up a business. I'll keep the money in banks and live off the interest. So it didn't make sense to me anymore. So she set up the business in the morning. She said, darling, I'm going to work. She'll leave for work. Then my kids were in school, and someday, or one day, my daughter went to school, and they asked her, what does your father do? Oh, my father sleeps in the morning. I said, what? She came with me, Papa. They asked me in school, what does my father do? I said, my father sleeps. So I said, no, it's time for me to set up a business. Because I also believe that my gift, because everybody has a gift, the blessing is to discover your gift.
Right.
So, of course, I discovered my gift was in business. I knew that. So I now said to myself that what's the direction in business? So I didn't know what to do. I left it at that. So after my daughter told me that, Papa, in school, they were saying that, what does your papa do? My papa sleeps. I said, no. I need to do something. And of course, considering that my wife always came in the morning, I said, darling, I'm going to work at 7 a.m. She had set up the dry cleaning business, which I'd obliged her giving her a loan. Then Nigeria there was no power. The entire country was on diesel, which we call in the oil industry, we call gas oil. So then the previous government, I had a lot of friends in government, and they used to sell a lot of gas oil to me, which I used to power my house. So this day I came home and there was no power. And I had to move my entire family to Sheraton Hotel. So I called a friend of mine and said, listen, where do you get diesel from? He said there was a company that supplies diesel. So I called up the company and said, well, they'll bring the diesel in 2 days. They gave me the price. It was very high, and I paid. 3 days after, of course, they never came. So I was driving from my office in Victoria Land. Then I got on the third main line and I saw it parked. And I saw the name of the company, and I parked behind it. And I said, listen, I paid you guys money for gas oil. When I supply my gas oil, I said, well, in 2 days they'll do it. Fine. I went back home. Of course, I'd kept my family in the town. So when I got home, 2 days after, I was descending the stairs and I saw this truck from the glass. The first house I built. I saw this truck, dirty truck, broken down in my compound. I just built the house and I'm like, come on. this truck, old truck, spoiling my beautiful floor. So I called my security guy. I said, listen, we need to move this truck out. So we moved the truck out, and I put old newspapers on the floor. So the truck came back in, parked. There was a pipe from the truck to my tank, discharging the diesel. So I said to myself, come on, I could do this business. Then, of course, I told Ellen the story of my wife and stuff, and I said, I could do this business, clean it up. So the truck went out, drove out, put the papers on the floor, the truck came in discharge. Then I went to the tank, I looked at it, the truck actually had a meter. It was meant to pump 2,000 liters into the tank. So the truck left, we paid the driver, I left. So now I said to myself, I could do this business. So the following day, I got to my office, I called my manager to call the manager of that trucking business. So the guy came to see me, and I said, listen, you know, your business looks interesting. Why don't you come and work for me? Of course, I'm a very unassuming person, and the guy said, no, I'm sorry. That was it. So I started making inquiries, intelligence about the business. Eventually, I found out that a lot of people buy diesel for their homes. So what I did was I bought a second-hand, not a truck now, a pickup. So I called on my friends and I said, listen, I could supply you guys diesel. So I put the drum on the diesel, sit in front with the driver, and I was delivering diesel to all my friends.
Yourself, you did that.
And they were all, of course, and they were all laughing at me. When we get to the club at night, they say, oh, come on, get out. Where's your pickup? Where's your diesel pickup? You know, are you selling diesel to this club? You know, and so on.
Right. And then you went on, obviously, to build a massive empire. But I must ask, in that journey from driving around in a pickup truck to now what you have built, what has been your worst day in business?
My worst day in business. I have different worst days.
Do you have one particular one that stands out the most?
Yeah, of course. When I lost $1 billion.
Right. How did that come about?
Fantastic.
You don't tend to lose that every day.
No, exactly. Now, when I set about my journey in business, I had two things in mind. Then, the first one was, where there's a will, you could get wherever you wanted to get to. You have to have the killer instinct. So now I decided that now, where there's a will, there's a way. I put that aside. Second thing, I said to myself, I was not going to have friends and enemies. I was going to have only competitors. So that set out my journey.
How did you go from a company that was turning over millions by the month to a company that literally was
Billions,
losing
actually. Billions.
Billions?
Yes, every month.
How did you go from that, though, to actually losing that much? What was the process? What happened? What went wrong?
What went wrong? You know, I told you earlier that you can't compete with destiny.
Yes.
So it was my destiny to make billions every month and also lose billions. Because God prepares you for a long journey.
Yes.
Which, of course, you're not in control of. Experience is always the best teacher. Okay, well now I'll tell you, coming back to your question, why I lost billions. Now, I didn't have a structure. The banks, I also put the blame to the banks, on the doorstep of the banks. All they were interested in was the profit. They were not interested in sustainability of the business. They were short-sighted. So all they were doing was throwing money at me. So they never advised me that, listen, you start up a business and God blesses the business from selling diesel in drums, 200 liters, to selling 400,000 tons a month. I probably had about 93% of the business on my fingertips. More or less, I had the monopoly of that business. So, in 2008, the oil prices collapsed. I had over 1 million tons of diesel on the ICs, and the price dropped from $146 to $34. That was one leg of it. Then, of course, the currency was devalued. I had a lot of dollar exposure. So that was I lost money.
Now, during this time, you had the biggest debt with ANCOM, approximately $1.2 billion. What was going through your mind when you realized you accumulated that much debt?
No, well, I had two options. Either to commit suicide, because the richest man in Germany then did commit suicide.
Did you consider it yourself?
Well, no. I just knew it was a phase I had to go through.
Okay.
You know, you say God prepares you for greater things. So I just knew it was the phase I had to go through.
Right.
And of course, experience is the best teacher, so I had to learn my lessons. So I had two options, commit suicide or weather the storm. And I decided to weather the storm.
Now,
I took the bitter pill.
in the face of all of that loss, just to put it into context, we lost about approximately $480 million when the oil prices crashed.
Now that's $1.2 billion.
More.
Well, with interest.
Right, and then that also added on 258 million through Naira devaluation. And then that was further compounded by $320 million due to
You
interest.
should have your facts right.
And then another 160
So in
million.
total, I lost $1.2 billion.
Yes. Now, I mean, that looks like money's going from every angle. How did you manage to recover it and actually sustain your business?
No. After I lost the money, something that struck me was, listen, I had to, my father has always been one of my role models in life and my mentor. And the first thing was I had to protect his name. Mm-hmm. He had a policy, honesty was the best policy. So I had to protect that name. And of course, the integrity. So, what option did I have? Like I said earlier, suicide or weather the storm. And I decided to weather the storm. I now looked at the entire scenario. Of course, I put a blame on the banks for not advising me to have a proper structure when the money was rolling in. So, I looked at the numbers, and of course, then, like it happened in America, the president of America did bail out a lot of companies. So the government set up AMCON. So my debt was about $1.2 billion. Mm-hmm. So the banks also had to take a haircut.
Yes.
Of course, good for them for their carelessness and greed. So they took the haircut. So they sold the debt to AMCON for, I think, about $800 million. So they took the shave of about $400 million. So I was left with the debt of $400 million. So I sat with AMCON and said, listen, AMCON did offer me a restructuring. And I insisted, no. I didn't want the restructuring. I wanted to pay the debts and move on and start my life again. So they got reputable firms to value my assets. And then I think I had about 100 and, okay, let me just, in the context of properties, in measured in flats, I think we had about 184 flats, which I gave up. I was the largest investor in Nigeria in the banking sector, which I gave up.
So you gave up a lot of shares in banks?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the major banks in Nigeria. In fact, I remember vividly that the central bank governor then did call me and said, what's the strategy? You have all these shares in all these banks. Then, of course, Africa Finance Corporation was a major shareholder. I was the chairman of Transcorp Hilton. I was the second largest seller in Mobile Oil Nigeria Limited, second largest seller in Chevron Texaco, Visa Phone, several companies. So I gave up everything. They valued everything, and I decided to give up everything.
So by the time you literally relinquished all of that
Yeah.
that you had accumulated, what was you left with?
I was left with my house in Ikoyi, my house in Abuja, my office on Walter Carrington, and my 37% stake in African Petroleum.
And how did you feel at that moment when you've lost over half of everything, all your assets? What was going through your mind? How did you feel?
No, I just had that feeling in me that once God blesses you, He never takes away His blessings. It was just God was just telling me that, listen, you need to learn a lot of things. You take the risks. And of course, I've done the chase. And I've achieved success, recognition. The fulfillment is, I don't feel I'm fulfilled yet now. Until there's no poor person in Africa. Okay. Yes.
Right. And what advice would you give to young entrepreneurs that want to follow in your footsteps?
They need to work extremely hard. And with the oil prices today, it simply shows that there is no free lunch anymore. People must work hard, extremely hard, to earn a living.
When you look back now and reflect on that experience, what did you take from it?
An entrepreneur knows what no one knows. That's the secret to success for an entrepreneur. An idea strikes you, which no one knows about. Only you know about that idea. That was what makes you successful. You know what no one knows. If I was telling my daughter the other day, I said, listen girl, in 50 years, of course, I'll be dead in 50 years, and there are not going to be petrol stations in the world anymore. You're going to have solar power, electric cars, renewable energy. I'm a good student of history, and I always say to my children that my vision is to have an empire that will outlive me. In my quiet moments, I think of people like, of course, I read about them. I never knew. I think of people like Mr. Rolls, that was a Mr. Royce, Mr. Sainsbury, Mr. Cadbury, Mr. Nestle, Mr. Dow, Mr. Jones. Now, I always look at what made these people succeed, or what has made their names outlive them. They were public companies. Eventually, they became public companies, and also they had a vision to set up empires that will outlive them.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. FEMI OTEDOLA, for joining me on my worst day.